I started making shorts and films with the resources I had available at the time since before the Panasonic DVX100 came out back in 2002. Since then, I've made a wide variety of projects and I've learned a whole lot about making films completely by myself. I hope that you find this helpful or at the very least are entertained for a few minutes. Everything begins with the writing process. Making sure your story or script is up to snuff is fundamental. This will not only save you time when filming, but it will make sure that you're hitting all the points your story needs to hit so you can get all your ideas across as effectively as possible. Also, remember that storytelling is most effective when an analogy is used to get your idea across. There's always more than one way about doing things, and by planning ahead, you at the very least have already thought about one of them very clearly. Choose your own style and production design. In order for your project to look cinematic and of high quality, you need to pay close attention to production design. When filming yourself, this just means be aware of what's in the frame. What will the colors in the frame be? What are you wearing to contrast that or to blend into the frame or image in a smooth way? When you're looking at a film, you're witnessing the work of huge crews with people that specialize in one job and one job only. Understanding the color palette, cinematic language, and approach you want to take will not only help you with the execution, but will also elevate your project in tremendous ways. When we look at a film, it's not just the cinematography we fall in love with, but the overall aesthetic. Pinterest is a great place to pull references from and get inspiration. I like to break the videos down into key points and then estimate a time for each point to get a better sense of the video's length first and foremost. This brings us to shot listing. Now that you have your story outlined and an aesthetic you want to approach, the next step is storyboarding and shot listing. I personally approach this with a very simple idea. Because filmmaking is a visual art form, our brains are accustomed to a specific language. So the more you help the viewer visualize, the more entertained they'll be. So when I'm referring to something, it's not enough to just say it. I like to show it, helping the viewer so they don't have to work to understand what you're trying to convey. Using framing as an additional tool in what is called the rule of thirds or the golden ratio to help facilitate the cinematic language. If you're not familiar with this, it just basically means putting your subject to focus in one of the 4 boxes or points in this grid. Every camera has it, including the iPhone. What aspect ratio is best for your story, or what aspect ratio do you want to explore? You have 9:16, 1:1, 4:3, 16:9, 2:35, 2:76, and everything in between. Framing for each one can bring specific ideas to your projects. There are so many options. Once I've got a better idea of the storyboard or shot list, I move on to filming. Lighting for me is one of the most fun aspects of filmmaking. It can really change a mood and sometimes cover up your lack of budget and/or options when filming by yourself, just with the placement of a couple of lights. Most things can be lit with very affordable lights. There are a few rules I tend to follow. I avoid flat lighting by always filming the shadow side and using lights for separation from backgrounds when needed. This simple setup alone always raises the aesthetic of my frames. Sometimes a rim light or an edge light can really make your subject pop. Also, this is a great place to use additional color. For me, the contrast of cool and warm lights raise the image to another level. Add a hazer and you have an infectious recipe for success. When you're watching a film, the camera is usually following the action of the protagonist to convey the feeling of what they're experiencing. In this case, you. When you're filming yourself, it's not as simple since you cannot operate the camera while being in the frame. Well, sometimes you can, but not if the movement needed is not a handheld frantic effect. Sometimes the camera glides, and the one way I found to get around stagnant shots is with an automated slider. If you don't have a slider, switching angles and mounting the camera to any object you can imagine as much as possible really helps with keeping the tempo and pacing of your video to a subpar level. This can be a great way to navigate around the issue. Editing with purpose and rhythm is my main focus when I'm piecing a project together. So often I find reference music or the actual music I can license and use that as my base before I start piecing a project together. This again informs further the choices made in the storyboard stage. But by bringing music to it, I'm now able to edit precisely to the rhythm of each track used. I find this approach actually cuts the editing time in half by having a solid foundation to build from. Once the edit is locked, I can begin the color grading process, one of my personal favorites. This topic alone can in itself be multiple videos, but without diving too much in depth, this is an opportunity to really dial in on all the work that you've done and make it pop. If everything else before has served your vision, this can be the cherry on top. This is also where you can ruin your work if you overlook this final visual process. And lastly, sound effects and the final mix. Sound design and mixing are the glue of a project, making sure that everything feels like you want it to and not necessarily like it should sound. Some of my personal favorite sound designers use familiar yet uncommon sound effects to get a point across. By allowing room to experiment outside of the norm, you can take a scene or shot and twist the mood to something visceral and spectacular. It usually takes me about a month to complete a video. So make sure to enjoy the process, think outside of the box, and always look for better ways to tell your story.